This time on Talking Vehicles with Joe, Ford Granada, Chevrolet Citation, and Pontiac Grand Prix. Some interesting and fun, even funny stories about my time with those vehicles. Now, the last time on Talking Vehicles with Joe, the last video that I posted, I began to tell you some stories that were fun and even funny about some of the vehicles that I own and some little bit more in-depth descriptions of my experiences with them. And I talked about my Ford Granada, which was a company car. I talked about the Volkswagen Rabbit company car that I had, and my 1976 Pontiac Grand Prix, as well as my Mercury Zephyr. But I forgot two particular stories that I wanted to share with you this time. So we're going to backtrack a little bit before we move forward and talk about some of the other cars that I had. And one of the stories involves the Ford Granada company car that I had. Remember, it was a 1979 Granada. I got it in 1979 and drove it for about almost 3 years, about 2.5 years. Well, this particular story involves a trip to Erie, Pennsylvania in the wintertime. I had gone to Erie. When I would go to Erie for business, I would work my way up there. I would work up to come up through Elwood City and Newcastle and Grove City, Mercer, PA. I would stop in Meadville and eventually wind up in Erie in the evening. I would stay overnight in a hotel and then work the city of Erie. It would take me a couple days to work the city of Erie. So I'd be in a hotel a couple nights and then I would leave and work my way back down to Pittsburgh where I live. This one particular time I went up to Erie, it was a winter time, and I made my normal rounds as I described to you. Get to Erie, get into my hotel, check in, go have some dinner, come back up to my room, do a little bit of work, and turn the television on before I go to bed. And the news was on. And so I listened to the local news for a little bit, just kind of get the flavor of what's going on around town. And the weather comes on. And the weatherman said that there was a system that was coming into Erie over the lake that they expected to drop a couple of inches of snow, maybe even 3 or 4, but that would be about it, and the system would move on. And, you know, in Erie, PA, 2 to 4 inches of snow is virtually nothing, man. They know how to handle that and keep the city moving. So I didn't think much about it and turned the TV off and went to bed. At about 5:30 in the morning, my room, by the way, was on the ground floor of this particular hotel. About 5:30 in the morning, I am awakened by the sound of car tires spinning. And it sounded like a car was stuck. And I thought, what in the world is that? So I get out of my bed, go over to the window, kind of pull the drapes back a little bit to look out. And there's a car sitting outside of my window with at least 6 inches of snow on it, at least 6 inches of snow, trying to back out of the parking space. Now, a plow had come down the aisles in the parking lot of the hotel and cleared the aisles, but of course, the snow was kind of piled up behind the car. And as he was trying to back out, he was hitting that pile of snow and getting stuck. And it looked like a blizzard going on, a blizzard. I'm like, what in the world? What is, this isn't what they called for last night. Turned the television on, the news came on, and I listened to the weather, and weatherman says, the system stalled over Erie. It didn't keep moving like they expected it to. And it was putting down about 2 to 3 inches an hour. And they expected it to be around for at least another hour, maybe longer. And the mayor had asked people not to go on the roads unless it was an absolute necessity or an emergency. And, the typical stuff you hear when there's a big snowstorm. And I thought, oh my goodness, I got to get out of here. So I quickly showered, ran down to the restaurant, grabbed some breakfast, and checked out and went out to my car. And fortunately, the guy that was parked next to me had borrowed a shovel from the hotel and was digging his car out. And I asked him if when he was done, if I could grab that shovel and use it to dig my car out. And he said, yeah, sure, I'll give you that to you. So I got in my car, started it up, cleared the snow off the car, but it was coming down so hard that by the time you were done clearing it, the windows were already starting to be obscured again by the snow that was hitting them and sticking to it. But I got the shovel, dug myself out, cleared my car off again, was able to back out of the parking space, Went back up to the hotel to check out. I didn't want to check out in case I couldn't get out of the parking space. At least I'd have a room. Went back up, checked out, and decided I'm getting out of here. I'm going to head back down towards home. So I pulled out of the parking lot, and literally the snow was coming down so hard that I don't think I could see 100 feet in front of my car. Under normal conditions. And sometimes when the wind blew, it would be much less than that. And I went, and this hotel was right off of the Interstate 90, that ran from Cleveland up to Buffalo through Erie. So I go up and I get onto Interstate 90 to head over to Interstate 79 to go south. And literally driving 25 miles an hour. Now, the one good thing about this whole situation was the Granada was rear-wheel drive, but I had probably 100 to 150 pounds of literatures, samples, and other materials in my trunk that I carried around with me because I was in sales. So that was assisting my traction. And we had just put brand new snow tires and regular tires on the front of the car. So as far as traction goes, I was the best it was going to be. And I was actually doing pretty well. I wasn't having too much of a problem going. It was just visibility that was a problem. So I get down to Interstate 79, get onto 79, get pointed south, and I am literally going 20 to 25 miles an hour. That's all that it felt safe doing. Well, very slowly I catch up to a tractor trailer. And I've got this tractor trailer in front of me, and I knew it was a tractor trailer because I could see the two red taillights on the trailer. And I get a little bit closer to him, and I think, this is great, man, because, wherever he can go, I should be able to go. I'm just going to follow this guy. So we're traveling along 25, 30 miles an hour, driving. Sometimes we'd speed up a little bit. Sometimes we'd slow down a little bit, but we're going along. And pretty soon we kind of move to the right a little bit and slow way down, and we slow down more and more and more. Finally, we stop. And we're just sitting there, and we sit and sit and sit. I bet you we sat for 3-4 minutes. And finally I thought, man, I wonder what's going on. I couldn't see anything. My windows are covered with snow. The only place my window is clear is where the windshield wipers are going on the windshield. And in the back, where the rear defroster is on, where the lines are, they were warm enough that they were melting the snow. But even in between them, the snow was still packed on the window. So finally, I decided, I've got to find out what's going on here. I'm curious. So I was just reaching for the door handle to open the door when I heard a knock on my window. So I rolled the window down, and there's a guy standing there, and he says, "Hey, are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Who are you?" And he said, "I'm the truck driver. I'm the driving the truck that's in front of you there." And I said, "Oh, okay. I've been following you." He said, "Yeah, I know." And I said, "What's going on up there? Why are we stopped?" And he started laughing. He said, "You don't know where we are, do you?" And I said, "No, I have no idea." He said, "We're in a rest stop. I had to go to the bathroom." And I had sat there behind that guy while he was running and went to the bathroom, and I never even saw him. It was still snowing so hard. And so we both got a good laugh out of that. And he said to me, "Do you got to go to the bathroom?" And I said, "Yeah, I could probably kind of go." And he said, "Well, hurry up. I'll wait for you." So I jumped out of my car, ran into the rest area of the building and went to the bathroom, came back out, jumped in my car, flipped the headlights onto high beam and off so he knew that I was back in the car, and we started rolling again. And as the further south we got, once we got below Meadville, Pennsylvania, the snow started to ease up, and made it all the way down to Interstate 80, and he broke off to go on Interstate 80, and I continued south. And by the time I got back down to Pittsburgh, it was just snow flurries. But it was interesting to be driving the car covered with snow, and you could see people that were passing me that obviously hadn't been that far north kind of looking over like all the snow on my car. But anyway, that was kind of a funny story. I sat there in the rest area for 4 or 5 minutes having no idea where I was. Another story that I kind of missed that I wanted to tell you involved my 1980 Chevrolet Citation that I had as a company car. Now, the Citation was one of the most recalled cars in America up to that point. It had a lot of problems. And one of the problems it had was the rear brakes would lock prematurely. And my car certainly experienced that. I remember the first time I was driving it, one of the first times I was driving it, it was raining and I was going down a hill. And there was a traffic light at the bottom of the hill. So I get down near the bottom of the hill. I'm going the speed limit. I'm not speeding. I step on the brakes, and all of a sudden, the ends of the car swapped. I was pointed back in the direction I had been coming from down that hill, going backwards down the hill. Oh my goodness, instant like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So I planted my foot on the brake, hoping to come to a stop without hitting anything, which fortunately I did. Traffic coming down the hill stopped way back from me. You can see they're looking like going, why in the world is this guy pointed at us? And I was able to turn the car back around, get it turned back around and point it in the right direction. And I thought, well, that was really strange. And then the next time I stepped on the brakes on the car, it wanted to do the same thing again. And that car always had a propensity to want to lock up the rear brakes and not be very stable. When General Motors announced the recall, we got the car back to the dealer. They did whatever it was they were supposed to do to try to fix it. And it helped, but the car never really was. The rear brakes always wanted to lock up early. Okay, those were the two stories about the two cars that I had forgotten to tell you. I want to tell you a quick story about my 1983 Pontiac Grand Prix, and then we'll end the video here. I had this 1983 Pontiac Grand Prix that I absolutely loved. It was a beautiful car, fully loaded, every option you could get, rode and drove beautifully when it was working right. One of the problems that car had was arbitrarily and randomly, without warning, all of a sudden, it had the full gauge package. All of a sudden, all the gauges would peg to one side of the gauge. In other words, the engine temperature gauge would go clear over as hot as it would go and show the engine full hot overheating. The oil pressure gauge would go full to high. The tach would wind clear around past red line all the way pegged. The speedometer would go all the way around to 85 miles an hour. Back then it was an 85 mile an hour speedometer. And the fuel gauge would go clear to full. After it went there and held for a moment or two, they would go back and sweep the other full length of their sweep on the gauge. So the fuel gauge would read empty, the tach would read 0. I'd show no oil pressure, engine full cold. I mean, it would just, it was wild. There was wild sweeps going on. When that would happen, the radio, which was an AM/FM stereo, it actually had a cassette player too, but it was an AM/FM stereo. The radio was a digital tuned radio. And on FM, the highest frequency that radios are supposed to go up to, because it's the highest frequency that's broadcast, is 107.9. Well, if my radio was on FM, it would show me like 118.6. And if it was on AM, it would go clear up to sometimes it would show 2100 AM, which doesn't exist. And there would be the radio would just go to full static. The antenna would retract. All this is happening at the same time. And then the engine would quit. And sometimes you could instantly restart it. Other times it didn't want to restart it. It would have to sit for a moment or two before it would restart. Well, I took the car back to the dealer and told them what was going on, and their diagnosis was a faulty radio, and which, I didn't understand. So how can a faulty radio make all these other problems? Well, it's electronic, and, if one electronic thing goes bad, it can screw up the other electronic things. So they put a new radio in it, and as I was driving home from the dealer, it did the same thing. So I turned around and went back to the dealer, said, hey, just had the same problem again. And they went, oh man, imagine that. We replaced a bad radio with a bad radio. And they ordered me another radio. Well, obviously the radio didn't fix the problem. And the car had been back to the dealer a few more times. Finally, they discovered what happened. The wiring harness that runs through the firewall, that was the main wiring harness to power up the dashboard. There's a hole drilled in the firewall, and there's supposed to be a rubber grommet put in that hole. So when the wires run through, it's not the wire just rubbing on bare metal. But in my car, when it was assembled, the grommet was not installed. And so the wires were rubbing on bare metal. It rubbed through the insulation, and the wire was shorting out. That's why all the crazy electronic stuff was going on, because the wire was shorting out. The dealer was able to put the grommet back in the hole where it belonged, get a new wiring harness, and it solved the problem. Unfortunately, with that Grand Prix, it had some other problems, including a sunroof that leaked. And it was chronic. It would leak all the time. It wasn't a bad leak. I mean, it wasn't like water poured in, but during a hard rainstorm, you'd see wet spots on the headliner. And I took it back to the dealer a couple of times. They tried adjusting the sunroof, couldn't get it to stop leaking. And finally, their solution was to put a bead of silicone around the sunroof. And that certainly stopped the leak. But of course, every time you opened it, that silicone bead was broken and it would leak again. So I finally wound up getting rid of the car because for job reasons, I had to get the 2 Mercury tow paths that I told you about. But anyway, that's the story of my Grand Prix. I loved that car, man. I wish that car would have been better because I really enjoyed the car. But it just was, unfortunately, a victim of the 1980s and the poor build quality that was happening then. Hey, I'm Joe Ferguson. Thanks for watching Talking Vehicles with Joe. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, like, share, comment. Tell me some fun stories about some of the cars that you've had. And share this with somebody that you think might be interested. And make sure you subscribe so you see every new video I post every Friday. I'm Joe Ferguson. Thanks for watching, and be on the lookout next Friday for the next Talking Vehicles with Joe.